Hello everyone, this is Amit Goswami and this is episode number 9 in this series, Quantum Worldview and Indian Spirituality. So we went through Patanjali, went through the creative process, and now let's fast forward all the way to Aurobindo. There are many great spiritual teachers in this big gap, but nothing really much significant happened in terms of furthering the worldview of spirituality. The reason we have gone through Upanishads and then Bhagavad Gita and then Patanjali is that there was a new aspect in everyone. The original spirituality gave the metaphysics of consciousness. That part was correct. They could not answer the question of how the one becomes two and then many. That's understandable. The scientific or any other kind of explanation that requires connection to the brain was just not available. But there was another aspect of it which was ambiguous. It was not clear what should people do, ordinary people, because the spiritual traditions seem to be saying the highest value of life is to go for the self. This is not reality. This is created with something that can be only called appearance, and so people develop this huge ambiguity. Is it meaningful to do anything worldly? Because if the highest goal of life is only to realize that the world things are an illusion, then what will happen to the world? One can of course argue if this is what caused the downfall of Indian civilization and all that, but probably it's not necessary to go that far. But nevertheless, it is true, this world negating tendency of many wisdom traditions certainly had an influence on how the human civilization's ups and downs went. Krishna, his work, Bhagavad Gita, has to be taken in perspective. The perspective is that to show that that is not the only interpretation of the Upanishads. Krishna is saying explicitly to Arjuna in chapter 2, read it again if you need to, where he is explicitly saying that, look, yeah, that is one thing that you could do to renunciate the world and go for understanding the self-realization. But that's not what you are faced with. Krishna is saying to Arjuna clearly, look, you are faced with the war in Kurukshetra. You have to face that battle. Now again, you can look at Kurukshetra as something that only Arjuna faced. We don't face war in Kurukshetra, you might say. But as Gandhi knew, and many others have interpreted Bhagavad Gita the same way, it has to have a more important message. The message is not confined to the battle of Kurukshetra. Kurukshetra is a symbology of the battle that we all have to fight. The battle is to face what do we do with this world. Yes, it was created in an illusory way. But do we perceive that we are ready for the ultimate liberation? Do you perceive us that way? This question has to be answered by each one of us and has to be answered in the affirmative, that we want to live a good life. We want to live a happy life. We want to live a successful life. We want to live in joy. Thinking that it is all meaningless is not going to help unless we are ready to renunciate the world. This is what Krishna is saying, that you cannot live in that ambiguity. You cannot just suffer from neurosis and become helpless. You have to stand up and recognize what you want to do and then do it. You cannot hide behind the ambiguity that, oh, Upanishads say this is all an illusory thing, creation of Maya, and therefore it could be meaningless and therefore nobody should do it. There is the alternative of taking it in stride and doing it anyway and see what happens. And the great shloka that came from emphasizing that view was, of course, big message. Karmaniya badhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. You do your work without expecting fruit of the action. That is one way that you can stay in samsara and not suffer from these ambiguities. Don't count on the fruit of the action. Thinking that it's illusory and therefore there is no fruit of the action is not helping. Thinking that I only work for the fruit of the action is not helping either. But the work you have to do anyway. You cannot not do work. This is what Krishna is saying. Isn't it better than to do the work that is actually work, creative work, rather than mope and say that what is the purpose, what is the reason, why should I work, it's all illusion? This is what Krishna is saying. He is giving us an alternative. And this alternative created a way of putting things together in a congruent way where the motivation comes. Motivation comes from establishing congruence in life when life becomes satisfactory. Make this your motto, said Krishna to Arjuna. Swadharma nidhanam sreyo parodharma bhayavaho. That's another beautiful sentence. What does it mean? When you say, I want to follow the path of renunciation because this is all Maya, this is all illusion, is that what you perceive as your dharma? Dharma means exploration that satisfies you. Is that the exploration that satisfies you? If it is not dharma, then you shouldn't touch it. Parodharma bhayavaha means it's fearful. What the consequences will be is absolutely horrible. You must stay within your own dharma. And first indication of this, that is that what profession have you taken? That is your dharma. That profession is established on the basis of the archetype that you want to follow. And for Arjuna, that archetype is one of being a warrior, archetype of power. And then Arjuna has to learn how to use the archetype of power in the right way, creative way. So in this way, what Krishna was teaching in the Bhagavad Gita is to deal with life as life presents itself. For Arjuna, it was war of Kurukshetra, actual fighting with his relatives. For us, it's different. Everybody's fight is different. But nevertheless, it can be looked upon as a battle. Or if you take from the transformative aspect that we talked about in the last episode, then you can look at the fight against all those three tendencies of the human condition: me-centeredness, negative emotions, and pleasure-centeredness. That too is a battle. To rise against all those tendencies and find the exploration that makes me happy, gives me satisfaction. That's the war of Kurukshetra for us. What is the archetype that I follow? How do I know this archetype? What is my dharma? That establishes the war that I need to fight. This is the message of the Bhagavad Gita, and how to go about it. Integrating all the things that give us dichotomies, that give us conflicts, that makes us so neurotic that we cannot act. So after we recognize that the integration and wholeness, this other archetype that gives us the impetus for integration, if we ask the question, okay, who followed this through? Who is the next to follow this through? Amazingly, not very much. I mean, Patanjali, as I've already mentioned, that's very good work. When was Patanjali's creativity work was actually conceived and carried out? Not very clear. Patanjali himself, it seemed like he was not the originator of his ideas, he probably just compiled it. And it is not even historically established when exactly he lived. Maybe 4th century BC, maybe 1st century AD, people are divided. But that's not as important. What is important is that we have in the Indian spirituality a clear understanding of the creative process. It just got lost, misinterpreted by subsequent translators, and now everybody thinks that Patanjali's book is just a yoga psychology book, control of the mind. Okay, all the way to Aurobindo then, because next to talk about wholeness really is Aurobindo. Everybody else just more or less talks about the object of spiritual tradition is self-realization. Aurobindo started talking about it in a different way. And in the process, he did something that is truly new in Indian spirituality or any spiritual tradition. Something that was grossly missed by the earlier sages, earlier thinkers, earlier philosophers, because it is something very, very difficult. It would have been something very, very difficult to theoretically predict. This is something we really needed evidence before we theorize. So what happened when the West came up with the idea of modern science? They too had to wait for quite a while until the data started becoming clear. Everybody in the olden days had the prejudice that the world is static. World is static. Doesn't change. Then what happened was that geology started, and also the world was not created very long ago, although Hindus was a surprising exception. They had concepts of time which were way, 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 very, very long, and that's more longer than it actually is. So Hindus went the opposite way. But in the West, the prejudice was that the world is very young, maybe 6,000 years old. And geology started showing data, science started showing data that no, the world is much older than that. Many geological epochs have come and gone. And with this geological research, they also established that life has evolved from simple creatures, first living cells, then conglomerate of living cells, then plants, animals, and mammals, and then primates, all the way to humans. This long progression of life, evolution of life, needed a science, needed explanation, and this was driven by Darwin's theory. However, Darwin's theory was seen as a theory that supported scientific materialism, interpreted that way, and went that way. So when Sri Aurobindo came into the picture, he saw the data, accepted the data totally, saw that there is nothing in any spiritual traditions which suggest evolution, although in retrospect some of us see some ideas in the Puranas, you come to that later, which may have been a precursor of the idea of evolution within a spiritual tradition. But let's not worry about that right now. It was not anything big. Nobody noticed it anyway. Darwin was the first theory, and the data that the paleontologists collected is the first indication that yes, life has evolved. Changes, that's the way life has come, making a lot of changes. It's not a static thing. Biblical book of the Genesis that God created all life all at the same time, that just cannot be correct. And Aurobindo then realized that but Darwin's theory cannot be correct either, because Darwin's theory is materialistic. Although in retrospect, I don't think Darwin's theory needs to be interpreted as a materialist theory. In fact, it cannot be. That story I have told in a different book, no need to discuss here. But Aurobindo saw the reason Darwin's theory cannot be correct because it is a sort of materialist tendering theory and not based on consciousness. And Aurobindo saw that if there is evolution, it has to be an evolution of consciousness. That was a big, big breakthrough. It turns out that in the West also there was a thinker named Teilhard de Chardin who did the same thing. So he wrote a book called The Phenomenon of Man. No need to go into it. Our subject is Indian spirituality, so I'll stay with Aurobindo's work, which was expressed in the book, The Life Divine. Wonderful book, difficult to read. Okay, so I'll simplify and I will only talk about the part that we need. It's a very big book, but we don't need much of it because Aurobindo goes into the spiritual aspects of it, how God forgets, how consciousness forgets, if you don't want to use the word God, which is fine, which I don't particularly keen on using either because you don't need it. So there is forgetfulness and all that used in original theory. We don't need that. All we need to recognize is the evolution that we see in the fossil records and that Darwin gave a tentative theory for is the evolution in consciousness. And what is the big proof of it? From a scientific point of view, Aurobindo didn't get into it very much. From a scientific point of view, Darwin's theory is not adequate because it does not explain one very big piece of data that many biologists still don't want to acknowledge. Evolution proceeded from simple fossils to very complex fossils ending up in humans. Darwin's theory does not differentiate past from the future, does not differentiate this one-wayness of the time that the fossil record clearly shows, simple to complex. If you look at the fossil record, immediately you can see what was past and what is the future. But Darwin's theory has no mechanism for producing this one-wayness of the evolution, and that is a major flaw of the theory. So the question is obvious to ask, what is it that is clearly shows the one-wayness, the complexity, evolution from simplicity to complexity? And Aurobindo made the clear statement, very wonderful statement that everybody has to comprehend, biologists and non-biologists. What happens is that evolution is an evolution of the way we experience the world. Remember, reality is our experience. What does a single cell experience? Think about it. Okay? Think about it. Single cell's cognitive capacity is this is food, this is not food. That's it. The experience is extremely limited. Yes, that is certainly an experience of feeling. I feel good about this thing, I don't feel good about this thing. It is a cognition. But the worldview of a single cell is nothing to crow about, right? How does that single cell, or why does that single cell evolve? Where is the motivation to evolve from that to this? Human beings with so much capacity to think, to feel, to make a worldview, to even make a soul if they want to, transformation. How did that happen? Aurobindo says it happens because evolution is purposive. Evolution is for the purpose of bringing potential. He didn't put, he cannot use the word potentiality, right? Because it's not in the vocabulary yet. But he is saying that there are certain aspects. This is why his theory talks about forgetting and remembering. So there are some things that consciousness has forgotten to produce this material state where consciousness has forgotten everything, all of its freedom, and then consciousness is remembering. So the journey of evolution is becoming more and more conscious by remembering new things. What it remembers first, it remembers the vital stuff about feeling, how to feel more and more better and better, and then how to think more and more better and better, and then eventually how to embody the archetypes and really get into supramental intelligence. This is Aurobindo's theory. It's a wonderful theory. In quantum language, what does it become? Reality is our experience. We want the experience to be richer and richer and richer and richer. How does that happen? By having the apparatus to experience more and more and nobler feelings. And then when the capacity for exploring meaning develops, mind develops, then more and more meanings. And when then the capacity to explore the archetypes develops, more and more embodiment of stuff like love, beauty, justice, all those things that make us really humans with soul. Now that's something to crow about, and we do crow about. To go from this state of the mind that majority of the people of the world has, to go into that state of mind where majority of the people of the world are dealing with the great things of life like love, beauty and justice, require transformation. And we are in that, deep into that. We started the journey some 5,000 years ago. Journey is barely begun. We are still very far from it, but as I said, somehow 15% of us have some inkling of what it's about. It's true. Still 85% dominates the thinking, and most people are in the lowest common denominator of the human mindset, but 15% ain't bad. It's pretty good. So if we take this attitude and this recognition, then let's see the immediate problem. That is the general story of evolution. I have written a book on it called Creative Evolution. You can read it if you are very curious. But the objective of this series is not that. This series is for showing the parallels of the quantum worldview and the base of the quantum worldview, firmly establish it, the lineage of the quantum worldview. So Upanishads to Bhagavad Gita to Patanjali's Yoga Sutra to Aurobindo, and now quantum physics. So how do you put in quantum language what Aurobindo is trying to say? In quantum language, First of all, we have to show that Aurobindo's theory is essentially correct. How do we show that? We show that by saying that quantum principles are coming into play. How do we show that? We show that by saying that there are creative quantum leaps in evolution. We show that by showing that there is evidence for quantum non-locality in evolution. These things are brilliantly displayed when you analyze the fossil data correctly. Darwin theorized that a continuous evolution took place, very slow, taking a long time, by gradual steps. This is not what the data shows. The data shows clearly that in between the gradual progression, there is also quantum leaps, epochs where there have been very quick, almost like at once. And this is what the quantum theory proves. And the details work out beautifully. All the creative stages, preparation, incubation, insight, manifestation, displayed by the data. Read my book, you will see all that. I won't go into this because this is not relevant to our purpose. What is relevant to our purpose is now going to Aurobindo's theory of how the mind evolved in human beings. This is the part where it becomes really interesting. Now, mind you, mind was not always rational mind. Rational mind has been around only for the last 12,000 years of human history, roughly. When agriculture was discovered, we know that more or less the mind has been rational ever since. What was before then? Who researched that? Those researchers are called anthropologists, and they have done beautiful research. And they have given us the data. And Aurobindo analyzes some of this data, which a psychologist or philosopher, Ken Wilber, also analyzed. His book is called Up from Eden. You can read that too, very nice book. I have summarized both Aurobindo and Wilber in my work, and so that's what I will present to you. It's a very beautiful description of how the rational mind came about, what went before that. And then, if this is the theory, what will be after the rational mind era is over to inspire us what we should look forward to. So, Aurobindo says, look at the mind. Aurobindo says, and we know already from the work of the great philosopher John Searle, which I have adopted, mind gives meaning. That's what defines the mind. Mind cannot be brain because brain and computers don't have the capacity to process meaning. This meaning-giving capacity is what mind does, that's unique to the mind. Yes, mind also can process information, but that's not unique to the mind. Machines can do it. But machines cannot process meaning of the information. Information comes from meaning, but not the other way around. So, if mind gives meaning, what would be the kind of meanings mind was engaged with initially? Aurobindo says that's obvious, isn't it? The most obvious preoccupation of human beings is survival. And what do you need to survive? You need to know the physical world. And indeed, anthropologists say the same thing. Initially, we have humans who are hunters and gatherers. Societies are all hunters for men, gatherers for women. And both being a hunter and being a gatherer requires physical work. You have to be aware of the environment in both occupations. Mind has to give meaning to physical, what is dangerous. Mind has to give meaning to what little fruit and what little root could sustain us. Then we can survive in a hunters and gatherers society. And what then? Now it's easy, because physical is the lowest of the totem pole. We know already from that Upanishadic story, the little boy's investigation. First he discovers Annamaya Kosha, and then what? Pranamaya Kosha. The next comes mind, gives meaning to vital energies that we feel. When does that happen? And why does that happen? Now you need to think a little bit, and if we think, we realize that what led to the next level of human society from the level of hunters and gatherers. Because at some point human beings must have discovered that this gathering, we can do better. If we learn how to make these roots and grains and sustenance in our own backyard by little instruments called hoe and stuff, similar stuff, then we can grow them. We can grow these roots and fruits and grain in my backyard, working together in a family, and we can survive on the food. We don't have to go and take the risk of being hunters and fight with all those big animals and make all that hard work. And this way men and women can work together in the garden. Isn't that nice? Of course it is nice, and it's disaster, because men and women, when they get together like that, they fight. So emotions cleared up and mind has to deal with that. Or I should say feelings cleared up and mind has to deal with that. When mind couples with feelings, emotions. So this is the era where we made all those negative emotional brain circuits. Animals have only feeling instincts. Human beings give meaning to them and makes them into negative emotions. This is also the era when we created the collective unconscious. So this era was very important, and this era, men and women are working together, also means something very important to modern people, because we realize that in this era, men and women were equal. Indeed, this is an era which is the favorite of feminine anthropologists, who declare that this is the golden age of human civilization. Indeed, because after this era went and the rational era began with large-scale agriculture, with the discovery of plow, which a woman cannot handle, what happened? We went back to a hierarchy of men superior to women once again. Women were relegated to the role of the mother, rearing children, bearing children, and no meaning processing for women. Meaning processing also changed. We didn't process meaning anymore, not of feelings. We needed to process meaning of meaning itself. This meaning of meaning or abstract thinking is what rational thinking is about. Algorithmic rational thinking. Great change, great advancement, but it's no secret that it is also very hierarchical. Agricultural societies by nature is very hierarchical. People of power, big strength, leadership, power, they monopolized much of the land and other people became their serf. The hierarchy was created in the society, kingdoms were created, people fought for this, how to expand their land. Trade was created by people who traded for, and again created more and more wealth. And so some people had not. Some people had big land, big power. Some people had big wealth, big abundance. Other people had nothing. And in these times, eventually, because some progress was also made in the way people think, all of a sudden we find something emerged which nobody anticipated. What emerged is this idea of the Upanishads. All is based on fundamental oneness. consciousness was discovered and its archetypes simultaneously. We discovered the archetypes which takes us into that unity. Amazing thing. Nobody anticipated. So rational mind, and after about some 7,000 years of rational mind, we find 5,000 years ago, or maybe 6, maybe 7, we have this discovery in India about spirituality and archetype. Intuition. Nobody had intuition before in this form, but now we intuited the archetypes and could shape our thinking according to the archetypes. Major change. What meaning should we give to this? Aurobindo says very simple. After rational mind, what will come? The archetypal mind, intuitive mind. After mind is no longer fascinated with mind, it explores the archetype. Next mind is the intuitive mind. Archetypes will dominate, will have soul, will be different, will no longer have the mental difficulties that we have created. Mind has created me-centeredness. When the me-centeredness is dominated by negative emotion and pleasure-seeking, mind becomes very destructive. It creates individuality, it fights with other individuals for power and abundance, and it creates very limiting consciousness. Feeling consciousness was much better because it supported non-locality. But the thinking consciousness divides. It's individual. Thinking ego forgets the non-locality. Thinking ego can become non-local if it is creative, if it engages with new meaning. But thinking ego can also be very satisfied with just the old meanings, non-creative. This is what Krishna is warning people about. So let's look at the Indian society, which is very, very documented, how that progressed. Initially, the archetype is abundance that people worry about after the archetypes were discovered. So what happens? It leads to the Vaishyas, the traders, the business people who work with the archetype of abundance. Next archetype is archetype of power. Notice these two archetypes are connected with security of people. Naturally, survival, that's the major need of people. At some point though, other archetypes started coming into the picture, and all of a sudden we also had the concept of going for the self archetype. This is the time of the Upanishad. They discovered that ultimately there is only consciousness. Consciousness is the ground of being. So we find a beautiful shloka in the Bhagavad Gita, Chatur Varnang Maya Sishta Guna Karma Vibhagasa. We have 4 different types of people depending on their guna, qualities, and karma, abilities, their character. And they are Brahmin, the highest abilities, highest qualities, then Kshatriya, warrior quality, in search of power, Vaishya, the quality of amassing money, abundance, and then people who lack these qualities, but of course can be professionals in other ways, they can serve. So they were regarded as the lowest rung of the society. But this is according to the qualities and according to the abilities, nothing to do with the caste system that India later developed. This has to be seen clearly. So in this way, what the Bhagavad Gita is describing was the structure of the society that we can see that was present in the olden days, in the days of the Upanishad. So the Vedic civilization was a wonderful one. Clearly, the Upanishadic civilization gave rise to all of this, and that was pretty good. So what happened then after the wonderful Vedic age? Or why should the Vedic age end? Let's put it that way. Why should the Vedic age end? Vedic age, in our history and the theory of the Yuga, Y-U-G-A, Yuga, this theory, we have gone through epochs of different levels of consciousness. So what is Satya Yuga? Satya Yuga is Yuga of wonderful unity connections. And that era, people have connections. People have connections, and these connections, of course, are non-local connections. So this is why this is the age of perfection, where the truth was recognized, truth of non-locality, the fundamental basis of reality was completely recognized by people because they lived that society. Non-locality was common. And then came rational mind. We did not have non-locality anymore. Rational mind is developing, and therefore we do not have that. How can we revive it? So revival. This revival was called Treta Yuga. Who revived it? That mythology is described in Ramayana. Rama revived it. How did he revive it? Although Rama is a king, he has the rational mind and he has the land, he has inherited this land, but he goes through his own trials and tribulations. He kills the negative emotions, Ravana, and he therefore is able to see differently. He also deals with his pleasure circuits, and therefore Rama establishes a kingdom in which the subjects of their say. Very unique kingdom, Rama Rajya. Very famous thing in India, ideal society that has never after been realized. Rama Rajya, where the projas, the subjects, and the king share their power in a participatory way. You may say, well, this is just a book. No, it is describing a society. It is describing a struggle that all people go through. These books are symbologies. These books are at once a history and a mythology. Ramayana, the story of Rama who established tangled hierarchy between king and subjects. What can be in an idealist society? What can be if we base society on the Vedic Upanishadic truth? However, rational mind took hold again, and this declines again. Now who will revive it? This is the story of Mahabharata, Krishna. How did Krishna revive it? Revived by the new spirituality of wholeness. Integrate. Don't throw away the world with thinking that it's all illusion. Don't go that route, Krishna says. Fight the war of Kurukshetra that is going on in each human heart and win it. This idea was so integrative that for 1,000 years after the Battle of Kurukshetra, this survives. But then again, rational mind, this declines. Kali Yuga has come. Now what to do? So we have Buddha. Now Buddha, you have to understand, is a very conflicting character to Hinduism, because he actually is like a rebel Like Jesus Christ was to a Judaistic society, and in fact Buddha formed a different religion, Buddhism. And yet Buddha is recognized as an avatar of Hinduism. Isn't that strange? Because he is an avatar. He is saving the society from immediate beginning of the Kali Yuga, immediate setting up the Kali Yuga by establishing the fact that, look, this society which has now become very racist, very elitist, very caste oriented, Brahmins are running everything and creating havoc, this society can be changed if we go back to spirituality once again. How do we go back to spirituality? This was Buddha's contribution. Go back to the basic Upanishadic truth. Buddha gave it different terms. In the Upanishad, they used Brahman. Buddha identified Brahman better than the original in a way, more scientific. He said it as nothingness. Nirvana is the only thing we can assert. What happens when you transform totally is that all of your desires get extinguished. Nirvana. And you realize that we don't call reality anything but nothingness. And this worked for a while. Indeed, after Buddhism, we had Ashoka, the greatest king that is not mythology, that is historical, that ever lived in all over the world. Biggest so-called empire, because it was not really an empire, it was really a whole bunch of peaceful countries held together by mutual persuasion that yes, non-violence is the way to go. Nobody has done it ever since then or before then. Ramarajya is still a mythology. Did that ever happen? We can never ascertain. But Ashoka actually existed. This is historical. So that's quite wonderful to remember in the history of India. But after that, decline. Kali Yuga took hold. And the vision of Kali Yuga stops with Kali Yuga. This vision is not right. Actually, therefore, there is a rescue from Kali Yuga, and this is called Kalki avatar. Now, this avatar concept is a difficult concept in Indian tradition. Can this concept be justified? Avatar means that God appears in human form. Do we really need this concept? If you think about it, then indeed other cultures also had people like avatar. Certainly Jesus could be called an avatar, Muhammad could be called an avatar, later Nanak can be called an avatar. But we really need to think of these people that way. No. Because from the scientific point of view, what are they? They are avatars of what? Are they self-realized people? No, because then they would not stay in the world. They are very much worldly people. What are they then? They are avatars of wholeness. And the tradition makes it very clear. Who are the avatar of? They are avatar of Vishnu. What Vishnu does? Vishnu is archetype of wholeness. Vishnu is the representation of archetype of wholeness. We like images, we made an image of Vishnu, and that's the avatar. Avatar of Vishnu. Nobody says in Hinduism that it's avatar of God, and that's the right way of thinking of the avatar. Avatars are not God incarnated, which is how we interpret usually. We think these people were God incarnate. No, that's not what Hinduism says. They are avatars of Vishnu, which is the archetype of wholeness. So what they realized is the archetype of wholeness. Buddha is the only one of the avatar who went further. he was not satisfied with wholeness, he went all the way also to self-realization. So he achieved nirvana and he went. He was liberated. But not the others. So the next avatar Kalki, we can think of wholeness coming back again, and how it will come back. Will it to be a single man, single woman, single person, or will it be collective? It was always collective, is my opinion. Krishna didn't win the war of Kurukshetra. Arjuna and all his friends, they were major help. Right? Rama did not win against the big army of Ravana. Who did? Look at the symbology. Rama fights with whose help? Monkeys. So what has Rama done? Rama has learned to control the monkey mind. All the work that Patanjali later codified, Rama has put that into action. Rama has actually done yoga, chitta, vritti, nirodha. When the vritta dominates, we become monkey. Rama has controlled that. That's Rama's strength. Rama has done something else. Rama has recognized Vibhishana. Who is Vibhishana? In the same brain in which Ravana dominates, the negative emotional brain circuits, there is some positive emotion. A few, very few, but there are some. And Rama recognized the power of those positive emotional brain circuits, and that's what he developed. So the war with Ravana and all this is another war of Kurukshetra, where Rama conquered the tendency to pleasure, which Ravana symbolizes, and the negative emotional brain circuits that the Rakshasas symbolize. And you can think of the war in Ramayana also in the same terms as we previously thought of the war of Kurukshetra. See, in this way, we see that there is a common theme that is running in all the stories of Hindu culture. And we can get a very different perspective of Hindu culture that way, Indian spirituality that way. More on this in later episode. A question has come from the audience to give you the time frame of Aurobindo's work. Aurobindo actually is a pretty decent man. He lived in the 20th century, born in the 19th, but his main work was all done in the early part of the 20th century, very contemporary. In fact, Aurobindo's movement is a very live movement in Pondicherry, India. You can visit it, and it's quite nice to see that Aurobindo actually left a legacy which made some influence in not only India but also outside of India. Second question is that what is Aurobindo's work relative to the discovery of quantum leap being important in consciousness research? The concept of quantum leap was conceived in 1913, more or less when Aurobindo was struggling with his ideas, but it made no impact on Aurobindo because the idea was just a physical idea, physics idea, a quantum physics idea that only much later was recognized to a cogent force of the quantum worldview. I did that in 1980s. Aurobindo was long passed away by then. So in a way, Aurobindo did all of his work independent of quantum physics, and yet his work is so conducive to quantum ideas. But these things happen all the time in the progress of science. In the history of science, the simultaneous parallel development of similar ideas are examples of non-locality, non-local discoveries.